This week, the church celebrates some fascinating saints. Every January the 21st, the church celebrates Saint Agnes. Have we heard of Agnes before? Agnes is one of 7 saints, one of 7 women saints, who's mentioned in the Mass during the first Eucharistic prayer. So Agnes is one name that we would hear more often. If Father Jamie were to pray the first Eucharistic prayer, I often pray the third Eucharistic prayer, but her name is always mentioned in the first Eucharistic prayer. So the question arises, who was Saint Agnes? Do we know of anyone whose name is Agnes or Inés? Who would they be named after? Agnes in English, Inés in Spanish. Who are they named after? Saint Agnes was a saint who was actually born into a wealthy family in the beginning of the 4th century. So about the year 291 she lived, and she was only 13 years old when she died. Follow the story now. So Saint Agnes, whom we always hear about in Eucharistic prayer number 1, she died at age 13. So what's her story that we have a 13-year-old saint? So she was born into a wealthy family in 291. So 291, do you remember the history of the church? Was Christianity yet legal? Was Christianity the religion of the empire yet? No, which means that anyone who was Christian, like Agnes and her family, they were in danger. She was born to a wealthy family, which means that there were all sorts of people, that she had all sorts of suitors, all sorts of persons who were interested in marrying her one day. But the challenge was that Agnes saw herself as already being married to whom? To Jesus. So that was her spirituality, that when all these other guys came to her saying, "Ooh, babe, wouldn't you like to be my wife?" At age 13 she died. Right? She instead said, "No thanks, I'm already taken." She wanted to save herself for the Lord. And so, according to the story, she was very beautiful. She had many suitors, and it was the governor's son who wanted to have her hand in marriage. Was that going to happen? Agnes replied, saying, "I am already promised to the Lord of the universe. He is more splendid than the sun and the stars, and he has said he will never leave me." Yikes, how could you leave a husband like that, huh? And so Agnes said no to the governor's son. He accused her of being Christian to his father, the governor. We all have a sense of where this story is going. So the governor said that if she denied God and denied being a Christian, he would let her go. Instead, she refused to recant. She was put in chains. She didn't pay attention to those telling her to save herself. And her line before dying, she said, "If I please you, I would offend my spouse, my husband. I would offend my husband, Jesus, if I tried to please you, the governor, and your son." And so she was beheaded. According to the tales that were told of her, she was as happy on that day of being beheaded as she would have been on her own wedding day. Why? Because she was believing that that day she was going to be with her spouse, with Christ. So that's the story of Saint Agnes. Some interesting facts about Saint Agnes. Saint Agnes is the patron saint of chastity, interestingly, because she preferred not to have relations with a man. The patron saint of gardeners. Any gardeners in the crowd? Your patron saint would be Saint Agnes. The patron saint of girls, of engaged couples, of rape victims, and of virgins. Agnes, how can you tell Agnes? We know that in iconography, the study of the saints, you can tell a saint by how he or she is dressed and or the objects that are with that saint. How can you tell a picture or an image of Saint Agnes? What is typically with Saint Agnes that you can tell Saint Agnes apart from any other saint? Saint Agnes usually has a lamb beside her. Why a lamb? Because the Greek word for Agnes, Anie, spelled A-G-N-E, actually means chaste in Greek. Chaste spelled C-H-A-S-T-E, not chaste like someone's after you, right? So Agne, A-G-N-E, means chaste, but there's a Latin word that's similar to that, Agnus. Any of us old enough to remember the Latin Mass? Agnus Dei. What is Agnus Dei? Agnus Dei, the Lamb of God. Agnus is the Latin word for lamb. And so Agne, Agnus, Agnes is usually pictured with a lamb beside her. Interesting. So you think you could identify an image of St. Agnes if we were to see one in the church? It's usually a young girl with a lamb beside her. Why is St. Agnes also interesting? Because on January the 20th, get ready, this January the 20th, on the eve of St. Agnes, young ladies believed that if they didn't eat dinner that evening, they would go to bed without eating dinner on the eve of St. Agnes, which is January the 20th. So young ladies would go to bed without eating dinner because they believed that if they went to bed without eating dinner and looking upward with their hands above with their hands under their pillow, that night their future husband would come and visit them in their dreams. How is that for an ancient belief? And so many girls on the eve of St. Agnes, I see many smiles. It's hard to hold back the laughter, right? Many young girls for centuries. That's how Susie met Herbert, you're saying? Herbert came to her in her dreams. So according to the tradition, girls were told that if they went to bed without eating dinner that night, that their future husband would come and kiss them in their dreams and would have a feast with them. And so the eve of St. Agnes, for many years, had a very popular grip in the minds of young ladies. John Keats, if you're ever interested, there's a poet, John Keats, here in the United States. In 1820, he wrote a famous poem about the eve of St. Agnes, which is why we know about that ritual of St. Agnes even today.